Hello, good evening, and welcome to Rich Politics. And it's Rich Politics with a difference because it's not presented by Richard, and we're not really going to be talking about politics. So, hello, my name's Jake Pugh, and I guess I'm a colleague of Richard's from last year. We did some campaigning together in the general election, and for my sins, I was an MEP. But that's kind of enough. I would watch one of your previous episodes, Rich, when you interviewed Claire, and I thought it was a really interesting piece because you explored her background, her values, kind of what makes her the person she is. And I think particularly because there's a real erosion of trust in institutions and sadly a lot of people leading these institutions. And I think people really like to understand more about the people who are standing for office, their values, what they believe in, what makes them tick. So I suggested we chatted, didn't we, during the week, and I thought I'd hold the microphone and interview you. So looking forward to doing that this evening.
Yeah, I remember actually campaigning with you. It was freezing cold. It was in December, and we were in a small little Welsh town called Tredegar for our viewers. And you were wearing a baseball cap, and you were fantastic, pushing leaflets through doors, knocking doors. And it was great because to have someone already, you were an MEP at the time, to be out campaigning was just fantastic. It was great. Yeah, we had a good time.
Yeah, and given that I don't sound very Welsh, but my surname is Pugh, and I love going to Wales because it's the only place in the world you don't have to spell your surname. And so there's, I've got very Welsh, strong Welsh connections, but so really intrigued to what happens, in Wales and the elections next year. But anyway, tonight's not about politics. It's more about you, Rich, and what makes you tick. So do you want to just start and talk a little bit about your background, your upbringing, your family, your early years?
Yeah, I grew up in Llanelli, which is West Wales, a very small part of the country, but I grew up in a very turbulent childhood. My dad was a hard-working man. My mother and father got involved with, drinking and there was drugs involved in my childhood. And at a very young age, I became addicted to drugs. In fact, I lost my brother at 35 to heroin. So my whole life really was wrapped around a culture of drug taking and committing crimes to feed that drug addiction. I was put into foster care when I was 10 years of age. My three other brothers were as well at the time. There's four of us, and split up from my family. So until I was about 15, by the time I turned 16, I'd ended up in Young Offenders Institute for some of the crimes I'd committed. It's all well documented in my book, To Catch a Thief, which is on Amazon. So I really didn't understand much about, the stuff that I'm involved with now. It was a completely different world. I'd never worked in my life. I was just a broken young man who lost his way and didn't really know a way out because all my friends were the same. It was part of the course, really. And that really was my upbringing. It wasn't the nicest. I still loved my mum and dad. My dad passed away a few years ago. But, inevitably, they contributed to, shaping the person I became as a teenager. And, I wasn't a nice person. And, I live with a lot of regrets from the past, but that's just the way I was brought up.
So I hadn't realised you were taken into foster care that young. So in fact, you didn't really have, because of your parents and their drinking or whatever, that you'd never really had a childhood as such. Do you have any recollection of kind of any fun times? Because when I asked you immediately went into kind of the pain of the past. Was there any part of your early childhood that you can remember with fondness?
I get asked that by my kids now, actually, and it's very hard to think of anything. The only time, because my dad left the family home before I was sent to foster care. I was sent there because my mother had a nervous breakdown, and she couldn't cope with us, and so she, dumped our bags in social services and said, I can't cope with these kids, and we were taken and carted off. So at 10 years of age, you don't know what much is going on, and I can't really recall many happy memories. I think things like my dad, when he used to work for a construction company, he came home one day in a JCB, in a big tractor. I remember sitting on his lap. I think that's about the only memory that I've got. It seems as if my mind has automatically omitted it from my history probably because of the trauma and the pain that I went through, Jake. I would have wished my past on anyone, to be honest.
Well, that was really interesting, because when I, as I said, when I asked you the question, you immediately went. So that was. And what about? One of the most interesting things I found about it is that, not about the politics, but when you go around the country and you meet people. I was extremely lucky with my education. I was very, very privileged. The schools I went to, the university, and that's, as we know, it's just the luck of the draw.
Yeah.
You're clearly a very bright guy. Did school really happen for you in any kind of way?
Well, Bringwing Comprehensive is the school I went to, but the first school I went to was Ysgol Bryn Shelfel. So it was a Welsh-speaking school, and up until the age of 7, I could only speak Welsh, and I used to go back to my grandmother's house and to do my homework, and my English was very poor, so my mother couldn't help me. So it was very difficult. So my education, I was back a few stages, because by the time I got to 7, my mother then moved me to an English school, because obviously she couldn't, correspond. We couldn't connect and all that kind of stuff because of the language situation. And I found myself like 2 years behind. They used to call it remedial class in school. So I was always behind in education, but I always felt I was sharp of thought and mind. I could think on my feet. I always had that. But obviously my education was, in some ways, it was cut short by the fact that I was a few years behind. In school, I used to have a lot of fun. I enjoyed school, but I was a bit of a lad, and I liked to play the clown in the class, as they say. And I suppose I used to look at the work and think, that's too easy. It's boring. I can't be bothered to do it, literally. And that's what I ended up doing, nothing. And then I got kicked out of school at 15. For, strangely enough, for taking magic mushrooms off the school field and eating them in school time. So I remember going to the headmaster with my mate. I shouldn't laugh really, but it is funny. And I was literally tripping my face off. So, I know some people might see me differently now, but this is the young, teenage Richard Taylor. And that's what he was like. And kicked out of school at 15, and then going from bedsit to sofa surfing. I had a spell on the streets of London with my friend Jason Hoskins, who sadly passed away, committed suicide. So yeah, it was an interesting upbringing, Jake.
It's interesting as as I listen to you talk, Rich, and you're such a passionate communication. There's still a sort of, there's definitely a tension in your voice. Of course, I'm not trying in any way to sort of belittle what you went through, because most people wouldn't be able to imagine.
Yeah, I think a lot.
There's almost like a tension in your voice.
I think there's a lot of that is because when I turned my life around, which I'm sure we'll come to a bit later, and on the path I'm on now, I found it hard for people to accept me, to accept this new Richard. So I'm always having to try and justify my past, or feel as if I've got we've all got history. I know that we've all got pasts, and I just always feel as if I'm on the defensive, and I shouldn't be, because it is my history. It is something. A lot of that wasn't because of just decisions that I made. Some of it was outside of my control. I had no control over the family that I was born into, or the upbringing that I had, and it shaped the person that I became as a teenager. So I think that tension sometimes is probably due to the fact that I find it frustrating sometimes to understand how people could accept someone like me now, who's changed, although I know and understand that they do, such as yourself and many of the friends I have, because it's not everybody. But yeah, I think a lot of it's to do with that, and
well, I think you used the word, I said tension, you used a better word actually, which is sort of defensive. And I think the most important thing, Rich, is that, and it's one of the many fantastic things about the country in which we live in, is that actually the vast majority, and all the best people, don't judge people by what happened in the past or whatever it happens, and people look at somebody for what they are now. And there's a whole nother point of actually somebody who's had some real life experience actually. Yeah. But as you said, let's move on to you coming out of that stage. So kind of, when did that happen in your life? Was it particular? I want to talk about the motivations, but how did you come out of it?
Well, 18 years of age, I was sent by a judge to a faith-based rehabilitation center. It was a Christian-run organization. And whilst I was there, I started to reflect on my life, the journey I've been on, the person I was, and I didn't like what I saw. I didn't like the person that I was. In fact, I hated myself. And it was through their support and through their kindness, through their Christian virtue, they set me on a program of rehabilitation that I went through for 12 months. So I broke all the addictions, that I was bound by as a teenager, and turned my life around completely. Started going back then to college. I did business and management HND courses, started to really educate myself. I was reading a lot of books at the time as well. And I found that education and learning became a new addiction for me. I was acquiring knowledge at a rate within 3 years. Actually, I remember the first 3 years of, turning my life around. I would just consume stuff. I didn't really use the computer much. I went, into technology. I just read books, all kinds of different books, from Welsh history to the industrial years in Wales. I mean, you name it. I just read loads of books, and of course, faith-based books, which really helped me. There were key principles within the Christian message that helped, like forgiveness and repentance, and think words like that some of our viewers might not be familiar with. And but they were words that meant something to me because I had to go through a process of change, and that change came gradually. It wasn't a Damascus Road experience in that sense. Things take time, and so I went through a whole 12 months of soul searching and identifying some of the areas that I felt were wrong in my life, and addressing those areas, which I've never done before because I never felt I had to before. But at this point in my life, I thought, I need to sort myself out. Otherwise, I'm going to end up dead, either by an overdose, or I'm going to spend the rest of my life behind bars. So I had to make a decision. Am I going to continue down this path, or am I going to change? And thankfully, through the work of this Christian Rehabilitation Centre, my life turned around for the good, as they say.
And so it was established as a rehabilitation.
Yeah, they're still going today. In fact, my wife and I were directors of it, and my good friend runs it now. We were running it for about 4 or 5 years. So I became the director afterwards with my wife, and we saw countless numbers of young people, which we'll come to a bit later probably, about some of my values that we supported and helped to get off drugs, to get off heroin in particular, and to turn their lives around, put them back into full-time education, and then find them jobs on graduation from the rehab. So, we had a 76% success rate doing it, and we did it for, I think, 4 years, my wife and I, and it was one of probably the most rewarding times of my life, I'd say, because not only had I changed, but now I was using my story and my journey to help others, to say, look, if I can change, you can change. And I think that's quite powerful.
It is, and that I think is, just touching briefly on politics, but not being political. I think what we both sense is that there's a complete vacuum of leadership, and people actually, what constitutes leadership is all about an individual, their integrity, their ability to set examples, and that's why it's so important. There must have been one or two, I don't know whether they were members of the cloth or nuns, or so. Come on, tell me, who was a key person for you back?
Well, I think there was a few. There was a young woman. Oh, she was not young, but she was back then, but not as young. She's older than me. Called Dinah Sansom. She was the founder of this rehabilitation centre. She had a profound impact on me. She basically just reached out to me and showed me kindness and love, things that I was not familiar with. I can't remember my dad or my mum really hugging me and kissing me and showing me affection. I knew nothing of that. And to experience that for the first time, when you're 18, it was very strange. And she was like a motherly figure, like a Mother Teresa to me, and it was really through her reaching out to me that had the profoundest impact on my life.
It's pretty amazing stuff. So, tell me a little bit about Jill.
Jill, well, I was actually studying at the time. I was doing a degree in theology in Birmingham, and this is where I met her. Her mother was a cleaner at the halls of residence, as they say, at the university course I was doing. And I went out for a McDonald's with her. We met somewhere. It might have been in church. I should remember. It was in church, yeah. We went for McDonald's after one of the services, and I thought, hey, she's all right. And she's a good Christian girl as well. And I got talking, and I just liked her laid back approach to everything, her simplicity. There was a beauty in her that I'd rarely seen in other people before. And so I was attracted to that. Just, it was as simple as that. And that was it. I mean, I think it was 2 days of being with her. The third day, I think it was. No, the second day, I proposed to her and asked her to marry me. So we didn't even have an engagement. We did for a few months after. But yeah, it was literally, when they say love at first sight, it pretty much was with Jill, and it still is. So
well, it was almost love at first sight for me when I first met Jill, because going back to that day spent campaigning in Tredegar, and it was a horrible day, and we went to the pub and spent about, had a couple of pints there for about an hour. And then you called Jill to sort of, I don't know, come and pick us up or dropped something off, and off she went. I just thought, oh, what an incredible woman. Anyway.
She's great like that. She's used to picking me up from a pub, so she's used to it,